Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's LinkedIn Live on Government Funding 101 for Canadian nonprofits. I was really pleased with the interest in this topic and not actually very surprised either, because I know how important government funding can be for nonprofits. So I'm hoping we can give you some useful content that will help you improve your day-to-day work with government. My name is Jessie Clark, and I founded Jan Clark Consulting in February 2021. Jan Clark Consulting is a progressive, feminist government relations firm, and our mission is that we are dedicated to helping empower nonprofits to achieve their goals with government. I founded this firm because I've seen many organizations face unnecessary hurdles and challenges in building a strong relationship with government. I firmly believe that advocacy, engagement, and seeking government funding are everyone's business, and that everyone is capable of doing these things. I also believe that our sector's voice is very important, and that this voice needs to be heard wherever policy decisions are being made. I believe that government funding can be an incredible opportunity for both government funders and funding recipients to build strong relationships and create meaningful and sustainable change. Why do I believe this? After spending 9 years in the Federal Civil Service, and then another 10 years working for various nonprofits and non-governmental organizations, including those focusing on Canada and those focusing more on international development, I've been on the front line of these relationships, and I understand their great potential. And I also understand and have seen for myself that many nonprofit staff and leaders are hesitant to get involved in government relations for fear of making mistakes. And as a result, they're missing out on valuable opportunities. They're also missing, the government is also then missing out on their voices and the perspective of the sector, which I think is also critically important. Government is very eager to hear from communities, to hear from your clients, to hear from your staff in terms of their frontline perspectives on the issues that are affecting Canadians. Advocacy is really just about bringing those voices to the table. And it's a very powerful tool and a very important one, and one that government is very interested often in hearing about. I'm so excited to be here today to begin this LinkedIn Live series. In this series, I'm going to be sharing a number of top tips on government funding for your Canadian nonprofit organization. Today, I'm going to talk to you about where to look for funding and how to determine if you're eligible for funding. In the coming weeks, we'll be covering several topics. These include how to position your organization for a strong government relationship. And once you've started to receive funding, how do you ensure that you keep getting it over the long run? We will also be featuring guests from the nonprofit sector who can share their own experience with government relations. Our next LinkedIn Live will be Friday, September 23rd at 1 p.m., and will feature Micah Anshin, who is the Director of Government Relations at Futurepreneur Canada, as well as a member of the Ontario Board of Public Affairs Association of Canada. He has had an interesting range of experience in government relations and will be sharing some of the insights from his work. For today's session, Rachel Faith Hamilton, who's on my team, will be moderating the comment section. Please feel free to leave questions and comments. Depending on timing, we'll try to address some today possibly, but we'll also track them and we'll ensure they're addressed at some point in our series of lives. So let's talk about federal funding of nonprofits through the numbers. There are more than 86,000 registered charities in Canada. Not all are active, and many are very, very small. I'm just going to pause because I just got a message saying some people can't see it, and I just want to confirm that everyone can see what's going on. So just 1 second. My apologies if you haven't been able to see. You'll see an external link in your original page to attend. People are waiting there. Please add the link there. People on the other link who cannot see the broadcast. Okay, so it seems like there's been two separate links. Thank you to those who added their comments here. It seems as though there's two separate links that have now been created by LinkedIn as a result of using this broadcast tool. So I'm hoping, Rachel Faith, that you can post the link again here and redirect people back to it so that we're all together on the same page and here for the same presentation. Great. Well, I'm just going to continue, and I'm hoping that as I continue, we will have a lot more people joining us over from the other link. So I just wanted to talk a bit about federal funding of nonprofits through the numbers. There are more than 86,000 registered charities in Canada. Not all are active, and many of them are very, very small with no paid staff. In addition to these charities, there are more than 80,000 nonprofit organizations and associations that do not have charitable status, but may be eligible for government funding. Overall, the sector employs 2.4 million people, 1 in 10 Canadian workers, and it contributes to 8.3% of Canada's GDP, an estimated $192 billion a year. So it's a big sector. There is a lot of competition out there for funding. Let's look at the supply side for a minute. The federal government has many different agencies and departments. In 2018-19, the federal government paid out $224 billion on all categories of transfer payments, including grants and contributions, which are the kinds of funding that usually goes to nonprofit organizations and charities. A great deal of these funds, of course, went as transfers to municipalities, to provinces, to pay for core services. And others of this funding went to for-profit organizations, but a significant amount still went to nonprofits. So there is funding that's there, but how do you find it? There are 207 federal departments and agencies. In other words, an overwhelming list of places to search for funding. So where do you start? Think a bit about the topics of interest that your organization focuses on. Think about geographic areas of interest and areas that you serve. Who's your local community? Where are you focused? Think a bit about who are the people that you're working for? Who are your clients? Who are the target populations that your work is serving? That can help you guide a little bit in terms of selecting from a wide range of government opportunities to look for those that are most suitable for your organization. It also helps to look closely at the eligibility requirements for funding opportunities, because not all funding opportunities are open to every organization. Some opportunities target specific kinds of institutions, such as universities or community agencies or Indigenous-led organizations. Some opportunities require you to have been in existence for several years and to have evaluations that demonstrate your impact or audits that demonstrate a clean financial record. Some opportunities are issued only to a select group of pre-qualified applicants each year. Well, this can help you narrow down available opportunities. It can still be very overwhelming to begin a search like this. If you Google federal government funding opportunities, you'll be taken to a Government of Canada website called Grants and Funding from the Government of Canada. You are immediately directed to choose from a list of topics on a menu to help narrow down your search. These topics range from agriculture to student aid. When I visited this page recently, the links were working for the most part. There were a few that kind of expired if you went too far down into the chain, but overall there was some very solid information on there. So this is not a bad way to start in terms of finding information on open or even on recently closed calls for proposals that you can plan to apply for in future. But this is only scratching the surface of the kinds of programs and opportunities available at the federal level. This doesn't include arm's-length government agencies or opportunities that are targeting specific regions through various regional opportunity agencies, for example. It also doesn't include the many kinds of unannounced informal funding opportunities that may exist or that can be created by building a strong government relations strategy. Generally, there are two main ways that organizations can receive funding from the federal government. They can apply through a competitive process, such as a request for proposals, and they're successful. Or they can establish a relationship with government that leads them to being funded directly without needing to compete. Both of these avenues are not easy. Both of these avenues face a number of challenges and pitfalls, and they both take slightly different strategies in order to pursue. But ultimately, the core fundamental approach that's important no matter what is that you want to focus on building a positive relationship and reputation with government stakeholders. Because no matter what kind of funding you're pursuing or what kind of advocacy change you want to accomplish, that will serve you very well. So looking looking first of all at the competitive opportunities, Governments will often publicize competitive funding opportunities like RFPs, and they'll often use, for example, sector associations. In Ontario, we have the Ontario Nonprofit Network. Federally, there's Imagine Canada. There are others across multiple provinces as well. They'll often actually be quite eager to publicize these opportunities because they're not always sure from their side that they're going to reach the right people. They're also available often through social media and of course, on government websites, as mentioned already. But even still, these published opportunities can already be quite challenging to access, let alone the unofficial, unpublished opportunities. Where do you even start to track down these magical unicorns, which actually do exist? So to avoid this overwhelm, I want to share 4 tips for finding government funding opportunities. These 4 main tips are: number 1, make friends. Number 2, leverage government transparency. Number 3, reach out and talk to your potential funders. And number 4, make use of the media. Let me explain a little bit further. So in terms of thinking about making friends, this is often a rather underutilized and underexplored element in government funding. It's important to look at your peer organizations who are serving a similar population or who are making a similar impact with your work, who have complementary strengths and complementary services to your own. Take a look and see, are they receiving government funding? If so, which department is funding them or which level of government? You can try and find this out by looking at announcements, and we'll talk more about that shortly, social media, through doing internet searches or looking at their websites and their own announcements of those of the organizations, their financial statements, although, as we all know, typically for charitable financial statements, there's just a broad category of government funding. But often, just by reaching out and talking to other organizations, you can find information as well. They're very happy to share this information on funding with peers in many cases. By building these relationships with other organizations, you can also explore potential partnerships. Joining with an experienced organization can be an incredible way for a new organization that doesn't have a lengthy track record with government funding to gain access to it. And building relationships across sectors and with innovative different organizations promoting different solutions can create a very attractive offering to government, who are often keen to fund more than one organization at once. So that's the first key tip, which is making friends. The second key tip is to make use of the government transparency tools that exist. So, the good news is there are a lot of tools the government uses to try and make their funding more transparent. The bad news is they're a little bit difficult to navigate. They're not necessarily set up to be especially user-friendly. And sometimes they can just be, take the form of giant databases or lists of funding opportunities that aren't searchable, and they can be kind of challenging to access. But more on that. In addition to the central website that I mentioned, and I would certainly encourage you to look at each department's website to see the listing of grants and funding opportunities. Almost every federal department on its main page will have a link specifically to funding opportunities through the department. And even again, if they're listing opportunities that have since closed, it does give you a strong sense of the kinds of funding and the kind of work that these departments are interested in supporting. In addition, the federal government has committed to providing information on all grants and contributions that is already completed that are valued at more than $25,000. This references the proactive disclosure policy. You can find this information at open.canada.ca. Using this database, you can search by organization's name, by funder, etc., or by other priorities as well. You can also search by level of funding. This is a huge database. The last time I looked at it, there were 692,800 records going back to 2005. It's a helpful source of information about all kinds of government funding, from $25,000 to $5 million grants awarded through various processes to various institutions. At Jan Clark Consulting, we would be happy to support you in conducting this search, analyzing the results, and of course, presenting it to you in a more readable and clear format if you prefer having some of that help. My third tip is to reach out and speak to funders. Speak to government officials and to politicians. Talking to civil servants may seem difficult or intimidating at first, but many departments are listed in public online directories that provide job titles and contact information. And again, happy to share some of those links as we send out follow-up material from today's discussion. You can, and if you reach out to someone on that list and don't get a response, try again. Reach out to them again or try someone else. You're not guaranteed to get a response that way. And sometimes, the information on the databases can be out of date, but it's a great starting point. And you'd be surprised at how many people are very eager to respond to organizations like yours, to hear about what you're interested in, and to talk to you about potential funding opportunities. Of course, most civil servants will not share unpublished or unconfirmed information, but they can point you in the right direction or give you a heads up when funding is going to be announced. Of course, it can also be worth talking to your local member of parliament. While they may not themselves have the information at their fingertips, they'll be eager to help you and have staff who can provide you with valuable information in many cases. This is where the old adage, all politics are local, is particularly relevant. Federal MPs in Canada represent their local constituents first, and are typically eager to respond to individuals and organizations living in their riding. At J.N. Clark Consulting, we can support you with building new relationships and leveraging pre-existing relationships with various decision makers who may have an interest in your work. Finally, a fourth area to look for funding is to look at press releases and social media. Governments like to share the good news when they make funding announcements. Almost all department websites have sections listing press releases. This is a great source of information about policy and program priorities and how the government talks about its work and funding. It can also be a great place to learn what kinds of activities and organizations are being funded. And as many of us know, the current federal government also loves to use Twitter. And this can be a great place to connect with government officials and have positive and friendly conversations about your organization and your work. And it costs basically nothing. Many officials, from director generals to associate deputy ministers to ministers, have active Twitter accounts. Journalist David Akin is another source of information. His Twitter account, @OttawaSpends, is a great source of government funding data. Using this account, David has actually been tracking funding announcements since 2009. In each tweet, he identifies the minister or MP making the announcement, the funding amount, the recipient organization, and the riding where the organization is based. Again, not the most searchable database because it's all found on his Twitter page, but it is a great way of tracking which, for example, ridings are receiving the most funding. So to summarize, there are many different sources of information on where you can find out what the government's going to be doing, what kind of funding they're interested in, what kind of programs they're interested in supporting. The next step after you've found this information then is to compare the kind of work that your organization is doing and do a bit of analysis. Is the kind of work the government is supporting, are there links to your organization's work? Are there similarities? Are there overlaps? Are there examples of this kind of work getting funded? When and by who? Are there RFPs coming up that are issued on a regular schedule? Some are issued on an annual basis. By developing a detailed picture of government funding for work similar to yours, you can be prepared for potential requests for proposal announcements. As many of us know, once the RFP is launched, it's often too late to establish partnerships. And often there's a very tight timeline, 6, 8 weeks, sometimes even less, which really forces you to move very quickly to make some key decisions. So the more that you can be prepared in advance, the better. And if you're able to do this research and develop a detailed picture of the potential government funding for your work, you can also understand who's getting funding for this already. Who are some potential partners you could speak to and look to work with in future? And you can also find out more about some of the non-competitive ways the government can fund nonprofits. As we will discuss further in a future session, being extremely well informed is a key step in developing a strong relationship with government. Government expects you to have done your homework when you show up at their door and ask questions. They expect that you've at least looked at their websites and have a good sense of their mandate and role and which level of government they represent. I hope that you found today's discussion helpful. It will be recorded. I know a number of people have asked that, and I apologize because I think there was an issue with LinkedIn having created 2 different links to the event. But rest assured, we're going to be posting it, the full session on YouTube as well, and sharing links to that back on our LinkedIn page. And I believe it will be accessible on LinkedIn as well for a certain amount of time after the event. Keep an eye on your LinkedIn mailbox for an invitation to subscribe to our newsletter, where we provide a lot of similar information and essential tidbits about government funding and how to access it. And please join us again September 23rd, when we're going to be having a conversation with Micah Anshin, a futurepreneur, who has himself interesting experience in working on behalf of nonprofits to seek government and win government funding. As mentioned at the beginning, my colleague Rachel Faith will also be reviewing any questions or comments, and we'll be keeping track of them for future discussions. So we will aim to refer to those during a future LinkedIn Live event. Thanks so much for everyone. I hope today's session was worthwhile. And I'm very excited that we have about 6 or 7 more of these sessions coming up, all of which will cover different aspects of government funding. And we're happy to share this information with you as well. If you want to reach out to us by email or reach out to us via LinkedIn, we can share with you some summary of key points from today's session. And also, please do subscribe to our newsletter, where you'll get weekly tips of this kind. Thanks again.